Well, welcome, all of you. Thanks for coming out tonight, and hello to the people online as well. My name is Noella Sudbury. I'm the founder and CEO of Rasa Legal. We are a new Arizona organization committed to providing pro bono legal services to people with criminal records. So why are we here tonight? Well, April is Second Chance Month, a nationally recognized month to raise awareness of how common it is to have a criminal record and to inform and highlight the need for communities to work together to create meaningful second chances for people with criminal records who are coming home from incarceration. The state of Arizona has the 5th highest incarceration rate in the nation. And even old and minor criminal records can hold people long after their involvement in the justice system. But Arizona has some new laws that are making it easier for folks coming back from incarceration to move forward. And Tucson has some incredible people and incredible organizations that are doing great work to support people with records. So I'm excited to be with you in Tucson here tonight and to be joined by these amazing panelists. The plan is I'm going to introduce this amazing panel of speakers. So everybody knows who we're talking to tonight. We'll have the panel discussion until about 7, and then for those who are here and interested in seeing how our software works, which helps somebody with a record determine what is on their record and what their record clearance options are, you're welcome to stay. And you're also welcome to ask questions of anyone here. We have a wealth of knowledge in the room. Some of these people have been doing record clearance and set aside work for 20 plus more years. And so we are here for you to answer your questions and hope it will be a wonderful night. So we will start with Brad Roach here. Brad is Senior Legal Counsel at the Pima County Attorney's Office. As Senior Counsel for the Conviction and Sentencing Integrity Unit, Brad leads the Pima County Attorney Office's effort to re-examine previous convictions and sentences where claims of actual innocence and sentencing improprieties have been made. Brad also leads the office's efforts in seeking expungement of marijuana convictions pursuant to Proposition 207. Brad graduated from the University of Arizona College of Law with a JD and master's degree in economics and began his career as a deputy Pima County attorney. His 8 years as a prosecutor focused primarily on cases in the Special Victims Unit. After 17 years in private practice as a defense attorney, he's come back to the Pima County Attorney's Office, where his experiences in both prosecution and defense will be valuable as the head of CSIU, bringing both extensive knowledge of prosecution and considerable experience as a defense lawyer in reviewing these very serious claims. Can we welcome Brad, please? Next to Brad, we have Andy Silverman, a professor at the University of Arizona College of Law. Andy Silverman has been on the faculty of the Rogers College of Law of the University of Arizona since 1970. He has taught in the areas of criminal law and immigration law. He took a 3-year leave of absence to be the executive director of Community Legal Services. In 2006, he co-founded the Civil Rights Restoration Clinic. Andy has directed the clinic since that time. The clinic has represented hundreds of people in applying to get their civil rights restored, convictions set aside, case records sealed, and related matters. Andy is one of the legal experts in Arizona concerning these matters and has spoken to both lawyers and community groups about these laws. Can we please welcome Andy? Charles, or actually we're going to go to Megan, who's in the middle. Keep going in order. Megan Page is the Pima County Public Defender. Her entire legal career has been in indigent defense. She clerked for the Honorable Deborah Bernini of the Pima County Superior Court Criminal Bench, and then became a line attorney in the Pima County Public Defender's Office, where she handled cases ranging from drug possession and property crimes to sex offenses and homicides. Megan became a trial team supervisor and then served as the chief assistant public defender before being appointed by the Board of Supervisors to lead the office in 2022. Megan is committed to developing a holistic defense model within the Public Defender's Office and promoting criminal justice reform measures, including rehabilitation and reentry services and restorative justice practices. Outside her passion for indigent defense, Megan loves spending time with her husband, her 3 sons, and 2 dogs, and rooting for the University of Arizona basketball team. Let's welcome Megan. Next to Megan is Virginia Morales, a directly impacted advocate for second chances and sentencing reform. She has served a collective 17 years in the Arizona Department of Corrections. She was released most recently and has returned to her family and community as of May 14, 2008. Since then, she's developed a thriving career, repaired her relationships, and wholeheartedly lends her voice to raising awareness regarding transition challenges and the joys of recovery. Please welcome Virginia. And finally, last but not least, Charles, or Chuck Pyle, the Executive Director of Second Chance Tucson. Charles Pyle practiced law in Tucson for 27 years before being appointed a U.S. Magistrate Judge in June of 2001, serving in Tucson until his retirement in March 2017. Judge Pyle was brought out of retirement from October 2017 to April 2018 to preside over the U.S. District Court in Flagstaff, where most of the defendants on the criminal docket were affiliated with one of the 12 federally recognized tribes in northern Arizona. In retirement, Judge Pyle has maintained his interest in criminal justice reform. He currently serves as the Executive Director of Second Chance Tucson. Judge Pyle is also state certified as an acupuncture detoxification specialist, and with his wife, Novi Pyle, trains people to provide the 5-needle ear acupuncture protocol for relief from the effects of addiction and trauma, as well as providing a free drop-in clinic every Sunday afternoon at the YWCA House of Neighborly Services in South Tucson. Please welcome Chuck Pyle. So now let's jump into the questions. The first one is going to be for Professor Silverman. So you're a law professor. You could have chosen to specialize in a number of different fields. What makes you passionate about this particular topic?
Well, thank you. It's nice to be here. Welcome to you all. Well, first of all, I got involved in representing people at the state prison about 1970. And I realized that many of my clients who, when they got out of prison, in many ways, for them, it didn't seem like it was much different. There was nothing done in prison to help them in their reentry. They were maybe given $50 and that was it. And if no one picked them up, they might take them to the closest homeless shelter. And when I talked to them, they all had difficulties in getting jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember some of them saying to me, you know something, I feel like I'm serving a life sentence here. And so I started getting interested in the whole issue of reentry, which wasn't much of an issue in 1970. A number of years later, I, along with some colleagues at the law school, offered a seminar on reentry. And one of the things that we talked about and studied in that seminar were the whole relief that's provided by Arizona statutes to people who have criminal convictions. And at the time, there were maybe some private lawyers in Tucson who were doing some work. in this area. There was one public defender who was doing some of this work as well. But that was it. So most people, of course, represented themselves. And I started thinking, well, this is something that law students, I'm sure, would get into, would learn from, would enjoy, and would provide, I felt, a service within the community. So in 2006, we created the Civil Rights Restoration Clinic and have been doing it since that time. So my passion for it really started many, many years before I actually started doing this kind of work.
It's great. And can you tell us what the clinic does for those here? I'm sure many will be interested.
Yes, we pretty much do everything that's provided for us. We represent people in getting their civil rights restored or applying to get their civil rights restored, get their convictions set aside. We do marijuana expungements. We now do work where we help people to get their convictions sealed. We represent people who have what's called undesignated offenses to get them designated, hopefully as misdemeanors. And then the thing that I didn't really think about till we started doing this work is most everyone we represent owes money to the court. Not everyone, but I would say the vast majority. The criminal justice system in this state, and maybe every state, is partially funded on the backs of criminal defendants. And I've never represented anyone in this regard through the clinic that hasn't been assessed something, at least some fee, maybe a fine, etc. And so one of the things we do in the clinic is try to get what can be waived, and we've been pretty successful. I would imagine we've got waived thousands of dollars over the years that we've done this. The biggest waiver we've ever got from a judge was a client who owed $135,000. The judge waived it. So we do that work as well. I don't know if you want me to talk anything about any of these, explain them to folks.
Sure, if you want to briefly just.
Okay, I'll do it very briefly. In Arizona, when someone is convicted of a felony, they lose their civil rights, not convicted of a misdemeanor. And those civil rights are the right to vote, the right to serve on a jury, the right to run for public office, and the right to possess a firearm. And if they have only one felony conviction and do not owe what's called restitution, they automatically get their civil rights restored after they complete their sentence. If they have two or more felonies, they need to apply to get their civil rights restored. So that's briefly what restoration of civil rights is about. We also have a set-aside statute in Arizona. And before I started doing this work, I said, oh, a set-aside. We can set aside a conviction. How great. And that is, that's not bad. The problem is, first of all, a set-aside isn't defined in a statute, so no one really knows what it is. But we know some things about it. We know that it doesn't expunge a conviction. It doesn't wipe it off someone's criminal record. What it does do, if a person is granted a set-aside, it is noted on their criminal record, and they have a court order that indicates it. So they do have the ability to say that a court has set aside my conviction. And I'm sure many of them, from what they tell me, it does help them in getting a job and so on, to get a set-aside. Then we have an expungement of marijuana convictions, not just convictions, but arrest charges or convictions. Prop 207, which legalized recreational marijuana in Arizona, also had a provision where someone could expunge their past arrest charges or convictions of certain marijuana offenses. And then the last thing I should mention is the sealing. That is the sealing of case records. And now a person in Arizona can apply to have their case records sealed, which is kind of like an expungement of those records. And it's not just convictions, but if they were charged, but the charge was dismissed, or they went to trial and were found not guilty, they can have those case records sealed as well. There are various requirements from waiting periods to having to pay what they owe the court or get it waived, etc. But what's great about the sealing statute is, one, that once they get it sealed, they can then indicate on a housing application, job application, loan application, etc., that they were never convicted or arrested or whatever. The other thing that is unique about this statute is that what was it? Now I slipped my mind. But it's the closest we have about expunging a conviction. So Arizona actually, it's hard to believe, I know, but Arizona actually is probably on the forefront, at least statutorily, compared to what a lot of states now have, even though people are starting to realize around the country that re-entry is an important issue, and that if we don't try to help people who have criminal convictions, then it doesn't even make sense from all of our point of view. And so things are getting better. I think Virginia can probably maybe speak to that. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. I'm not saying they're perfect, they're not, but they are better. And so those are the kind of things we do in the clinic, and those are the kind of things that are available by statute.
Thank you, that's very helpful, and I think a great segue to Virginia, who I would like to go to now. As Professor Silverman mentioned, having a record is incredibly common. 1 in 3 Americans have some type of misdemeanor or felony record. That includes over 2 million people in the state of Arizona. And Virginia, I'm curious if you can talk more about this. If it is so common, why isn't it talked about, and why don't more people know?
Well, I think people do know, but unfortunately, what the media portrays is all the ways we recidivate and all the new crimes we're committing. And they forget that there's a big population that's growing every single day of impacted people that are changing their lives. I'm gonna cry, but I'll finish. It's something that's near and dear to my heart, because for a long, long time, I didn't think that change was possible. And I know that it is now because it actually happened to me. It didn't happen to work for it. By the way.
And I would love for you to share just a bit about your journey and your path to the justice system.
That way we lost some great tissues. I'm gonna cry. I really believe that it's in the telling of our stories that we heal. So every chance I get to, I will always share my story to just shut the fact that there are so many people trying to change their lives and just do something different. So I'm using heroin when I was 14. It's not gonna be a long drawn out story, but just so you get the gist. Not everybody comes from a good background. Not everybody is nurtured as a child. Some people are raised by terrorists, and I happen to be one of them. I don't mean literal terrorists, I mean an emotional and a physical terrorist is what I mean. So at a very young age, I learned that I wasn't really worth killing. And I ran away from home when I was 14. And found an older group of people and started using heroin at a very, very young age. I was sentenced to juvenile when I was 16, sentenced to rehab when I was 17, and I stayed there until I was 18. And I wish I had been smart enough to go to the adult side of the program, but I wasn't. Because in all my 18 years, I knew everything. And so I quickly went to the lifestyle that I knew, because it's the only time I ever felt comfortable in my skin. And it began a cycle of 28 years of abusing heroin, 17 years cycling in and out of the Arizona Department of Corrections. I had 8 felonies, been to prison 5 times. And the last time I went to prison, I went to prison for stealing $27 from my neighbor's counter. But because I had a horrible record on paper, I looked like crap. And so when I sat in front of that judge, he sentenced me to 6.5 years for $27. Now granted, I don't make excuses for what I did because it wasn't mine to take and I should have never taken it, least of all from a friend. But it wasn't worth 6.5 years of my life. I was an addict and I needed help a long time ago. But it's easier to throw people away. And I feel as if I had been thrown away for a long time until I stopped throwing myself away. And when I was facing those 6.5 years, I knew that something had to change. And I knew that something had to be me. Like, no one's gonna do it for me. I had to change. And luckily, I found some programs this time around. And I was released May 14th, 2018. I just celebrated 11 years of sobriety, April 3rd. And
you can keep going on. Everybody just wanted to cheer you on for your length of sobriety. And I'm curious if you could just add here at the end a little bit about why was this last time different for you? What was the turning point?
I think there were a few things different that led to this last time. One, I was 42. Like, my God, if I got in trouble again, I knew that I was gonna need someone to push me around in a wheelchair, and I just couldn't believe that that was gonna be the rest of my life. And I don't mean to cross any lines or offend anyone, and I hope that I don't, but Jesus Christ spoke to me, and he told me that I needed to, I won't tell you everything, he told me, but we had a real good discussion. And I knew that my thinking had to change, and my thinking was flawed because I believed within everything inside of me that I was born to be an addict, that I wasn't worth anything, and that's where I shine. I used to always say I was really good at being an addict, but I really wasn't because I went to prison 5 times. So how good of it could I really been? So I got to prison, brand new outlook, I was gonna change, got classified to a yard, and I found a program called Arrowhead. And there I found a company also called Sudbury. They operate inside of the women's prison in Arizona, out in Goodyear, but they also have a call center in Indiana in the prison, in Florida in the prison, and they're dedicated to teaching women marketable skills. And I found my career and I found my passion, and today I'm a sales manager. And I am badged, so I get to go to the same prison where I did time, raising my granddaughter. But it all started with my thinking. It all started with my thinking that there had to be a different way, and I found it. Thanks to the people, like everybody in this room who's open-minded enough to believe that second chances exist for a reason, because everybody needs that one person. There's so many people who poured themselves into me just because they saw something in me that I didn't see, and I wanted to live up to those expectations. Haven't it make sense?
Well, congratulations on your incredible journey and all that you've overcome and achieved. That's such a difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
I'd like to go to Megan now. You've represented a lot of people in the justice system. And as you've watched those clients re-enter their communities, I'm hoping you can talk about what kind of barriers attach to a person with a record.
So I think it starts from the second someone leaves prison. I represented clients who were released with a bus ticket to Tucson and an addiction and nowhere to go. And unsurprisingly, they end up back in the criminal justice system. But it really is a life sentence in many ways. And we hold record sealing clinics. Once this new law passed, we started holding clinics. And it really highlighted what I already knew, which is the generational trauma of putting people in the criminal justice system. We had people come in who were, and I want to take a step back and say, I have really thoroughly liked most of my clients, right? Like my clients are real human beings with families and aspirations and childhoods and also deep trauma. And we had people come in who were just delightful to talk to, who had a conviction from 1975 or 1982, and they'd never been able to get a good job. They hadn't been able to move their families into safer neighborhoods or send their kids to the schools they wanted to. And so not only had it impacted them, it had impacted their children and their grandchildren. And it felt like, how on earth do we expect people to quote unquote change their lives when we put so many barriers in their way? They couldn't rent an apartment, they couldn't get a job, their children grew up in the shadow of all of that. And so if we as a society say we want to rehabilitate people, in reality what we're doing is we're preventing rehabilitation. And that's what I've seen time and time again.
Yeah, I think that is the sad reality for many people, is it's a life sentence to poverty.
Yeah.
And generations of poverty.
Yes.
I would love to go to Chuck now. You are the executive director of an organization that helps people like the clients Megan just described. Can you talk about what Second Chance Tucson is and what sort of services you provide there?
Yes. So we started Second Chance Tucson in 2014. The San Francisco Giants had just won the World Series. So Mayor Rothschild's an enormous Giants fan, so I knew he was in a good mood. I said, why don't we get together and see if we can do something to help these people get jobs and kind of reduce the stigma. He was all for it because he saw it as an economic prosperity initiative for the city of Tucson. And so over the years, until COVID, we used to do large events for the most part. We would do a large jar fair at the convention center, and we would do a community forum. The last three of them we did at Fox Theater. We bring in nationally known speakers. We don't always get a crowd between 250 to 300 people. And that was kind of what we were doing. COVID hit and made all those large gatherings impossible and kind of set us back, but we're back on our feet. Thanks to Ms. Corona from the Bureau of Prisons. We had a job fair last August 17th, so our first in-person event. We're going to have another one August 15th, again at the Tucson Convention Center. We're going to have again, in terms of reducing stigma, we have a few ventures. One is our community forums. We're going to have a virtual community forum, one that you can just get and see on your computer. It's going to be on June 4th from 11 to 12:30, and the keynote speaker is going to be Dr. Ryan Cornell, Director of the Maryland Department of Corrections, Rehabilitation and Reentry. That was trouble saying that, but I like rehabilitation and reentry. I just thought they changed the name a little bit early. So that should be a wonderful event, and I encourage you to sign up. It's information's on our website, which is secondchancetucson.org, and information about events. Other things we're doing, we engage in arranging volunteer activities where people from the community and people who are justice involved can work together on some sort of volunteer project. One of the newest things we're doing is what I call the Second Chance Tucson Speakers Bureau. The community forums are very good. We get great speakers, but they tend to be delivered to people like you, people who are already interested in the issue and kind of leaning the way I'm thinking. So our strategy with the Speakers Bureau is we're going to go to churches and chambers of commerce and Rotary clubs and outfits where people are getting all their information from the TV and portraying people who are justice involved as pretty horrible people. And explain to them exactly what Megan said. These are really, they're very human people, and we had to start recognizing that and treating them. The best thing I liked about Megan's introduction was when she talked about restorative justice, and there's another thing we talked about, 76, holistic defense. That's that criminal stuff.
Yes, yes.
So,
Bringing it to Arizona.
yeah, so this whole thing, holistic defense, restorative justice, both concepts have at their center treating everybody involved in the system as a human being, first and foremost. That's the starting point to the whole thing. And my 17 years on the bench, that's not the way I saw it. I saw people being rushed through the system, barely knowing what was going on. The next thing they knew, they were sent for 6.5 years for stealing $27, or 11 months for having a positive UA. It was just like, these are self-defeating mistakes. This is ridiculous, and we have to find a better way. I think that there's more and more people now that see we got to do things differently. The system has developed over 4 or 5 decades. It has a lot of momentum to it. It's not easy to change, but there's a lot of people here who are determined to make a change, and we need people in the community who are really interested in that and support that. So events like this are kind of important. We need to change the conversation out in the community about people who don't need to have the rest of their life, judged by one day.
Absolutely. I would like to go to Brad now.
We're happy to hear from Brad too.
I was one of them.
It may be not surprising to people in the room that an executive director of a nonprofit and a public defender would care about restorative justice and holistic defense. But it turns out that some prosecutors, more and more, hopefully, as time goes on, and people in law enforcement also believe in these principles. I'm wondering if you can talk about, as a prosecutor, whether you support this, and if so, why?
Thank you. It's a great question. And so I was a defense attorney for 17 years, and then Laura Conlon, the county attorney, called me and asked me if I could come back to prosecution. And because I knew who she was and what she ran on, I said absolutely. And so the idea from a prosecutor's office is this is not about coddling defendants or not holding people accountable. It's the opposite. It is crime prevention by helping people if they've made a mistake in the past. They've paid for their duty to society, whatever it is, probation, prison, jail. The data shows that if you help people get a job, start doing productive things in life, they will recidivate less. And so it is crime prevention by helping people be made human and be perceived as somebody who is human and made a mistake and now wants to do better. And so that's the basis of the idea of how can we help crime not happen? So not just address it, crime is happening, we're going to come in and throw people in prison. Can we do things and handle situations such that people won't commit those new crimes? So that's what we're hoping to do.
I love that. I would like to stay on the topic of jobs for a minute. The national unemployment rate is hovering around 3.5%, but the unemployment rate among the formerly incarcerated people is 27%. I'm going to throw this out to the whole panel, whoever would like to respond. Why do you think it's so high, and what must change to improve this statistic?
I think it's so high because the narrative around people in the criminal justice system is not accurate. There's an idea that people who have been through the system are bad people who do bad things because they want to do bad things, which is not at all true. And there is a just real stigmatization about people with criminal records. I think there's several things that need to change. The first is we need expungement laws so that people can actually really put their criminal history behind them. Record sealing is great, but there's a lot of loopholes for when people have to disclose, and it still puts people in this defensive stance where they're having to re-explain over and over again a bad decision. You know, when people ask me, how do you represent those people? The thing that always comes to mind is, do any of us, this is Brian Stevenson, right? This isn't me, but do any of us want to be judged by the worst mistake we ever made? We've all made bad decisions. But for most of us, the world doesn't judge us based on that decision. And for people with criminal records, they do. I also think that we as a society need to reevaluate what the criminal justice system is for. Is it really for treating a public health issue, which I would argue substance use disorder is? Is it really to solve homelessness? Or are we pushing everything into a criminal justice system and asking it to solve societal and health problems? And until we as a society change our views and the narrative around who is in the system, I think we will have a problem.
Yeah, if I can speak to that, I agree with what Megan said, but I would like to add that things are a bit better, actually. And why are they a bit better? Well, first of all, there's a thing called ban the box. And there are some employers out there, and what ban the box means is that they don't inquire when someone applies for a position about their criminal record. And because what invariably happens, let's say a human resource person gets, 25 applications for a job. Well, the easiest thing to do to start off with is everyone who said they have a conviction, we'll put them aside, we're not gonna worry about them. It's the people who don't, we'll interview and et cetera. So the feeling is if they don't ask it on their application form, then, hopefully, at least some of these folks will get interviewed. And the feeling is once you interview someone and meet them, you look at them differently than just looking at their application. And a true ban-the-box employer then, even if he or she wants to do a criminal background check, they would only do it after they offer the position to the person. Or they don't do it. Or even if they find out they have a conviction, then they start thinking, but I really like that person. They're qualified, I think they would fit in well, let's take a chance. And so that's going on, around the country. And a lot of big employers, let me mention one, the Koch brothers. If you know about the Koch brothers, it's actually the Koch brother now, one of them just passed. They support very conservative policies and organizations in this country. They're a ban-the-box employer. And there's many others as well. Target is a ban-the-box employer, and their headquarters is in Minnesota. They took the lead to get the state of Minnesota, the legislature, to pass a ban-the-box legislation. University of Arizona is ban-the-box. Governor Ducey issued an executive order banning the box within some state agencies. So that is happening. Then there are a lot of employers now. We have a job fair, as Chuck mentioned, and we have, about 50 employers that come, and they come there and, at least with the feeling of, the willingness to hire someone with a criminal conviction. Jim Click. Jim Click is very supportive of all this. he and his companies hire people with criminal convictions. So it's not great, it's not perfect, it's not like probably everyone here would like it to be, but it's getting a bit better. And people are starting to recognize what Brad said. It makes sense to all of us to try to lower these barriers.
And I think that's one of the most exciting things as I've done work around the country that I've seen is to see people make the business case for criminal justice reform, to have employers understand that we can't continue to shut out 1 of 3 workers. We have a labor shortage and we need people in jobs, and the research around people with records is good. Their retention rates are longer. They work hard. They know what it's like not to have a job. And I think really seeing some of these conservative groups, seeing businesses, seeing people across the aisle start to understand that this is a common sense policy, not a partisan thing that's good for people and essential to our economy is really exciting to see. But I want to bring Virginia back into this conversation because though we have made a lot of progress, I'm wondering if you can talk about, as someone with a criminal record, on your journey from the job seeker's perspective, what you experienced and what some of those interviews were like.
Well, I feel like I was super fortunate because I found that company, Sudbury, and they operate inside of the Arizona Department of Corrections for Women out in Perryville. So before my release, I had a job. 2 weeks later, I went right back to my job. I did leave Sudbury for a while and went to another company, but I don't ever find that my background has been an issue because I tend to lead with my challenges when I talk to someone. I tend to just let people know who I am. I think someone was mentioning making us human, because if you're able to tell a story and you're able to let someone see you for who you are, I have yet to find someone who has not been willing to give me an opportunity or a chance. I will say that when I was looking for an apartment, I spent about $300 in fees until I found a man who said, all I care about is that you have a job and that you look like you're gonna take care of my place. And that was the beginning of just getting a rental history. But I think oftentimes we can sometimes create a challenge that maybe isn't there. And we think, oh, these people aren't gonna give me a chance. And so it's easier just to not do it than to just lead with your heart. I mean, it's worked for me.
That's wonderful.
I could say though, just to give a little perspective, I could say the previous times when I got out of prison, when I wanted to change my life and it didn't exactly work out that way, jobs were a hassle because you had to be like Boston Market, and because I checked that box, I wouldn't get an interview. And I think sometimes that could be what leads to the higher unemployment rate with directly impacted people, is because we've come out of incarceration and we really didn't have any on-the-job training or certificates or anything that we can say. I may not have the actual experience, but I have the knowledge to do this. And so they want us to get jobs at Jack in the Box. And I'm 40 years old and I don't want to work at Jack in the Box. And so I think that giving some type of training or on-the-job skills would, I know there are companies that do it today because my company does it, but more programs like that would help the re-entry process. Because when you feel like you're providing for your family, when you feel like, I mean, I went to work every day when I was in prison, 6 to 5, every day. And when I was in that on-the-job training, I didn't feel like I was in prison. I felt like a person, and people held me responsible, and they held me accountable. And when you give people a nurturing place to learn and grow and not feel like you're less than, it's amazing what you can do when you come home with just the right kind of support. And it's important to remember that 95% of people who are incarcerated, they're coming home. They're coming home to the communities that we live in today. Are we gonna help them? I say yes.
I say yes too, and I'd like to go to Chuck. You put on these fair chance hiring fairs for people with records on a regular basis, and I think that, as many of the panelists have said, things are starting to change and employers are starting to get it. And I'm wondering if you can talk about, in your experience, when fair chance hiring works, like what is a good fair chance hiring policy? I talk to a lot of employers who are interested in fair chance hiring, but don't really know how to do it. And I'm wondering if, based on your experience, you can speak to that a little.
Well, certainly the first policy is not to have or not to have the box that you have a criminal record. You know, if you want to, through the interview process, you know, after the interview, and you've made a decision, you can check the record. So if you're running a daycare center, you know, you're going to want to check the record and make sure you're not hiring someone who shouldn't be working. You know, I think that one of the things that happens is employers have good experiences, and then they have, you know, good and bad experiences with people who don't have a criminal history. They have good experiences with people who have a criminal history, and then they have a bad experience with someone who has a criminal history, and then it's like, oh, I better not do that. And that's something that kind of plagues the system at a lot of different levels. You know, well, this person should be released on this under recognizance, but if they do something bad, I'll be responsible. There's just all sorts of levels of, you know, parole. We're talking about parole. You know, hardly anybody gets paroled, because if they get paroled, you should be lowering the population of prison, and if they do something wrong, then someone's responsible. And we don't have enough people courageous enough to say, I'm willing to accept that responsibility. The other thing I'd say, I'm always behind on the lingo, you know, but so it's fair chance now. I'm trying to make my organization obsolete. You know, but actually, I should have changed the name to Second Chances, because when you come out of prison, the stat that I was looking at every month drives me nuts is the Department of Corrections puts out, they call it Corrections at a Glance every month. Beautiful demographic information, everything. And they talk about, you know, who's in programming, and then it's addiction treatment. Like last month, it was 585 people in addiction treatment. And then there's an asterisk. It's been like this for 10 years. And you go down to the asterisk. When you get to the asterisk, it'll be a number between 78 and 82%. This past month, it was 82%. It says 82% of prisoners at the time of intake report a serious substance abuse history. So we have 82% of the people showing up in prison with a serious substance abuse history, and 1.4% getting addiction treatment. And we're blaming the people who are coming out for a problem that we intentionally ignore. So when I say second chances, Corona should have been on this panel instead of me, but she has the, what do you call it? That thing where everybody pretends to be a pawnbroker.
Re-entry simulation?
Yeah, the re-entry simulation. So you go through this exercise, 4 weeks of re-entry, in 15-minute segments where there's play actors kind of thing. And so when I did it, I ended up in jail. You know, so you realize, well, how am I going to get to work? You know, I don't have transportation, I don't have housing, I don't have money even for bus fare. Thank God they don't charge for busing. I mean, when you go through that simulation, you realize people need a lot of chances. You know, if somebody shows up late for work, you know, something like that, or has a family problem, then you need to look at, well, what have they done for me so far? And is it time for me to overlook this and give them another chance? Because this is, you know, I've never come from prison back here, except when I visited this Corona Dale. But I mean, everybody I talked to, I mean, it's a pretty stunning transition. It's a pretty stunning transition. So people need a lot of support and a lot of chances. And prison should be the absolute last resort. It's not cost effective. It's not good solution.
And I'd love to bring in Brad here as we're talking about incarceration rates, and Arizona having the 5th highest incarceration rate in the country. Why do you think Arizona's rate is so high, and what needs to be done to reduce incarceration?
That's a tough one. And I've been thinking about that. And actually, her example might be a good one here. So in certain areas of the world, they believe if somebody steals something, it's just to cut their hair. In Arizona, you steal $27, they feel it's just to send you to prison for 6.5 years. If you do that somewhere else in the country, you would maybe get probation, maybe not. And I think what happens is there becomes just kind of a feeling of that this is what is justice, because that's the system we all live in. So if Megan and I had a case, and I just say it's a robbery with one prior, and then she'll know, okay, so you'll probably offer a prison sentence of 1 to 3.75 years, something like that, because in our community, that's what we believe is right. I don't think there's anything necessarily true. Maybe not you believe it's right, but that's what it's accepted on. This is what we do, and so if that's just what happens in cases, then that's what continues to happen. And if you ask somebody who's doing it, a line prosecutor who grew up in a supportive household, went to undergrad, went to law school, never had a whole bunch of problems themselves. And then they say, well, that person should have known better, and they've had several chances, so 6.5 years seems about right. But if they lived in Seattle, maybe they wouldn't feel that way. They would feel that, all right, this was based on an addiction or something, so we should give them another chance or do something else. So I think it is just the community that we've built. This is, so Texas might handle it one way, we would handle it another, but it is just the community that we've built that needs to be not dismantled, but there needs to be more conscious decisions about, like Judge Powell was saying, the prison should be a last resort. Like nothing else has worked, and we have to all regret. The prosecutor should be like, I'm sad that I have to do this. The judge should be sad. There's just no other way to handle the situation. And I think we just need to recalibrate in Arizona necessarily what we think. And I'll take it out. What we think in the prosecutor's office of what thing is the right thing to do, and go back and look at it differently. And I think that's why we're good guys.
And Megan, I'd love your perspective from the other side of the aisle. We look very eager to respond.
Well, not directly to Brad. I think, there's mandatory sentencing laws in Arizona, which Andy was just whispering at me about, we both agree about, and it makes it very, very difficult for criminal defendants to go to trial. It makes it very difficult to negotiate, because if you have a client, I've had clients with a couple prior felony convictions who were driving a stolen car that they didn't steal, but some other person, that they were using drugs with gave them to drive. And because of their priors, they're looking at 10.5 to 35 years in prison, which I think would be astounding to most people to realize. And so if they get a plea to 1 to 3.75 years in prison, that's a steal of a deal. They're not going to risk going to trial on that. But they're going to prison for driving a car that they may have assumed was stolen. I think we really need to reevaluate what prison is for. I think there's a misunderstanding among many people that prison helps people rehabilitate. I think there are some programs that help people, but for the most part it doesn't. People don't come out in a better position than they were. There is a fundamental lack of understanding about the root causes for people to end up in the criminal justice system. This person wasn't driving a stolen truck because they want to victimize the person who someone else stole the truck from. They're driving the truck because they're high and they've got trauma that they need to address, and they weren't thinking through what they were doing. Throwing them in prison doesn't change any of those things. But it's tough from a defense attorney perspective, because your job is to minimize the consequences for your clients, and they're in a very difficult situation. So I think, unfortunately, it takes very different issuing and plea policies to give people the opportunity to get treatment. I will say, I also think it's difficult for prosecutors politically to do that. when our communities need to invest more in alternative options. So, it would be much easier to say, we will give this person multiple chances if we were willing to fund more programs and more treatment. And so I think as a society, we need to say, first of all, we're going to invest in human beings, which as a defense attorney is ultimately what I come back to. I understand why we talk about public safety and fiscal responsibility, but to me, they're human beings that we should treat like human beings. But it takes people to say, okay, we're going to treat this differently and then invest accordingly. And I think that is ultimately what needs to happen.
I want to open it up to our audience now. There's a lot of engaged folks here who are nodding along. What questions do all of you have for the panelists? Yes.
You talked about a bandbox for employment, but Virginia also talked about challenges of finding an apartment. Is there a bandbox movement with apartments, and if so, is that a harder sell to apartment owners than it even is to employers?
I'll take a swing. So that's a great question, because my current belief is that employment is still a challenge for justice-involved people, but housing is the big thing. And Rona, she agrees with me, right? I mean, housing is a tough thing. And it's so important. I mean, it's in a lot of ways more important than employment, right? Is you don't have a safe place to stay. You don't have a good place to start. So I'm trying to think of strategies where Second Chance Tucson can start. We don't have the funds or the grants or anything to supply housing, but I'm trying to look at getting some representatives from the city and Primavera and some of the bigger places to figure out, we've got to come up with some strategies here. What can we do? When we would do the job fairs, we would do what we call job fair orientations. We go to probation offices, in the conference rooms at public libraries around town. And we would teach men and women how to fill out their resume, how to dress for an interview. At the end, we would have to do their elevator. We had them do their me in 30 seconds speech where they really hit the employer with, this is why I'm going to be your best employee. And just have them pragmatically do that. And our experience was the people who went through that did better. First of all, when they came to the session, they got a $25 gift certificate or something like that, so they looked sharper. But they were better prepared. And my vision right now is I think we should start doing housing application orientations and figure out how we can give people strategies for being more effective when they're seeking housing, how they can make their pitch more effective, how they can explain to the landlord, hey, listen, I'm going to be your best tenant, for God's sakes. For 20 years, I've been cleaning everybody else's house. I'm going to be your best tenant, and I'm tired of taking my daughters to the McDonald's so they can do their homework using their Wi-Fi. I won't do anything to disrupt this. That was the same strategy we used for employment 10 years ago, and I think we can do that with housing now. But we need to get a lot of people involved, and I think this is a big focus for the city already. I think it's a big focus for the county. It's a big focus for some big agencies like OPCS and Primavera. And it's a big concern for the Bureau of Prisons, state parole, federal halfway house. It's a big challenge. So to me, that's something we really have to meet head on. We really have to get after it. And so it's a tough thing to do, but I think it's one of the most important things we can do.
Not that many years ago, HUD, Housing and Urban Development, the department, was putting out materials on how landlords can deal with people who have criminal convictions. It wasn't positive, I can tell you. Police departments were having training, or they were training landlords on how to deal with that issue as well. And that wasn't quite positive. A lot of that has stopped, but people in the community will understand that jobs are hard to come by many times for people with criminal convictions. They don't think about housing. They don't think about it as an issue that people are denied housing in our community. I get calls from people, this is what they tell me. My spouse is getting out of prison. I went to the landlord and said, hey, my spouse is gonna come live with me. He or she is getting out of prison. What happens next? They try to evict that person because they don't want someone there who has a criminal conviction. So it's a major issue that we need to start really looking at and addressing. Because what happens is if they can't rent a decent apartment, then they usually go back to the same neighborhood and where they had problems before, because that's the only place that will rent to them.
Big issue, housing for sure. Other questions from the audience? Oh, good, we've got a bunch. How about you right here? Yep.
Yes, I have a question. Someone had mentioned that the director of YWCA might have prematurely changed their name to Sudbury Rehabilitation
Oh,
or
it was his predecessor. I just thought it was ironic that they changed the name of the organization but didn't change any programming or anything.
Me too.
To call it.
Prior to the current director?
Yeah, it was prior to the current director. I think it was actually all the way back to Ryan. No, we're Shen. I guess we're Shen. But, and the same thing in California, it's California Rehabilitation and California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. So it, nice label, but you gotta start doing the things that people got. One of the things that needs to be done is, I'm not trying to lose a job for Sully, but we have to get the size of prisons way down, because you can't program, you can't do stuff in the prison if everybody has to be performing security functions. And if you have jails that are chronically understaffed here, state prisons are chronically understaffed, the high security prison frequently has 30% of their positions vacant. So you're not going to be doing programming because everybody else has to be there opening and shutting doors. So we have to come to the realization, we have to prioritize who we're going to send to prison, because we clearly can't, we don't have enough, we cannot hire, for 10 years, we haven't been able to hire people to run these facilities. So how long of a trial period do you need to figure out, we need to build these things for fewer people and so that it fits the staffing levels that we can maintain. And it's going to be a tough sell, but that's what we need to do, because then people are going to be treated mainly in the prison and go through some quick training, get back to the community without being gone for 6 years. Be gone for 3 or 4 months. Let's get the situation calmed down. I don't get the answer. Didn't select who, yes.
Well, like, why does that have to be a prison? Why can't, I remember when I was in mandatory, she had to pass, before you went to out of the army. Where does it say that you can't have mandatory, help, being an action, mandatory, you have to take it. You've got 6 years of doing nothing but playing cards and working on the yard. Where is that mandatory to work on what issues you might have? You gotta work at after you get out of prison. Have you been waiting and then your salary, you got no idea time's gone, you got all these other issues on top of the issues you already had.
Right.
And they get you out to oh yeah, there's programs out there, but you gotta go and find them, acknowledge them, One of the things is, I'm a firefighter. Part right, so But, yeah, if I would known about the TCAP program, and I'm probably the first of the TCAP. If I would have learned that before I was 50. And I learned that when I was the one that was, she's never, 3.5 years, for walking on somebody else's property, or somebody else loved it, but I was on that property, thinking I was helping somebody else. There's a lot of behavior, and prisons don't need prison. I believe it is, where we put people just so that we can get rid of them from it. Don't behave if they know they're fine.
But we have to keep in mind that the United States has a prison mindset. The United States has 5% of the world population and 25% of the prison population. Think about that.
Do they still give tax credits for prisoners?
For players?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, that's still there. But your point's very well taken. Why aren't we doing something? So it's going to, one of the things that happens is the community has to, instead of having their outrage of, can't you keep these people behind the fence? They have to have community outrage that, hey, how come they're coming out of prison back to our community in as bad a shape or worse shape when they were in? That's your fault, and you're putting the burden on us.
Where's the question is what got them to where they're at in their head? Where's that?
Right.
What started it? They weren't born seeing that. Something was there, and that needs to be there before prison instead of after.
Right.
And we all do something bad, we all fall short, but some people don't have that common sense when or there's some things that you don't do, it's like you don't let out your car, and you don't let out your wife, and so,
Yeah. But like Virginia went through so much childhood trauma.
yeah.
And I did, so Virginia's trying to decide, should I use heroin? I might get addicted. Well, maybe it's not bad, it's very, very cool. Or when I'm at the same age, I'm trying to think, Yale or Stanford, So does that make me more moral than her? Not at all. If I was in her situation, would I have taken the heroin? Sure. And that's where we have to get off of our morality pedestal and start treating people as human beings and trying to figure out some solutions. And that's why it really used to just rip me up for sending people back for UAs. It was just like, this is nuts. They're not going to get treated, they're not going to get better, they're only going to get worse. So why are we're doing it? Because we can, because we have the power to do it. We have to start thinking of smarter ways. There's a lot of people that we can get out of that prison early. And the other thing is, I know I figured out a way of working that, but trauma, the childhood trauma, the most over-incarcerated people in the country in Arizona are Native Americans and Blacks. 400 years of history of historical trauma. Tons of when you look at you start interviewing people. When I was a judge, looking at the pre-sentence reports and the childhood trauma evident in so many of those pre-trial sentence reports. I mean, there's a lot of healing that needs to be done, a lot of healing. And there needs to be a lot of different strategies. For the Native Americans, those strategies have to incorporate, they should have the opportunity to incorporate traditional healing. And the thing I like about Active Detox is it's community-based healing. So I could train any of you to do it. And you could go into community settings with people that trust you. And in this totally holistic environment. And that's what we need to start helping people heal. And prison puts them in an environment where they're constantly on alert. It's not a very good environment for human trauma, for sure. So we've got to come up with some different strategies. We need a little more community outreach to kind of support pushing people when pushing that direction.
I think we have time maybe for one or two more questions. Yes, the yellow.
What hope is there for juveniles that get arrested for something that probably they didn't do? They're in foster care because their parent, one parent or more, is already incarcerated. They get a ridiculous bail, they're separated from their foster care, they're sitting in a prison, they feel pressured by the, I don't know, prosecutor, district attorney, I have no idea who it is, to take a plea deal. And they don't really have any advice because they can't afford attorneys. And so now, they're minors. Well, now for the rest of their life or for however long this is gonna take, because you're just a dumb kid and agree to a plea deal because you don't know what you're doing and you're scared, what hope is there for them?
So my office actually represents juveniles in juvenile delinquency proceedings. I think there is some positive movement to understanding juvenile brain development that did not exist a couple of decades ago, right? There's this recognition that, which those of us who are parents know, like a 14-year-old kid is not capable of thinking through the consequences of action. So it's not even things they didn't do, it's things that they did because they were a kid in some circumstance. I think though there needs to be a lot more investment in education, beginning with early childhood education. I actually saw Chief Hasmar wrote a really great op-ed in the Daily Star maybe a week ago about how for community safety we need to start investing in preschools, which I think is fantastic. There are kids in these zero tolerance schools that get involved in juvenile delinquencies because they got in a schoolyard fight, right? Things that 50 years ago would have just been someone saying knock it off and sending them home for the day. But I do think there is much more movement in understanding that we have to treat juveniles differently. But it takes a lot of investment from the time kids are little. To what Judge Kyle was saying, I grew up in a family where I had two parents. I came home from school, I had snacks, they made me dinner. I didn't have to worry about if I was gonna eat that night. Reading my clients' dependency records, preparing for sentencing, you read things where you think this child was gonna end up here from the time they were 18 months old. Like there was no chance for them. So it's investing a lot in people, but I do think we're coming a long way. I know AMFI is developing a program to do a sort of community school model where they're doing after school programming for both parents and kids and providing dinners and sports for kids. I think it really takes community coming together and investing from the time kids are young and understanding that not everyone has the same start in life, right? And we have to try to even that playing field a little bit.
One more question. Yes.
I'd like to ask about probation and the thumb it puts on people who are in it. Last you also talked about economic impact and thinking of it as an economic issue that the governor touted a change to earn time credit for probationers. So if you're working, you get 30 for 30. I'm on probation. I've been asking my PO about it for more than 8 months. Doesn't know anything about it. The attorney I hired at the time for everything doesn't know anything about it. I've asked a lot of people about it. I'm doing what I'm supposed to and exceeding, I think, through a lot of hard work. I did find a good job. It took a while. But I feel like all this hard work, like no one cares, especially the people who are supposed to be guiding me through this. And I know my PO is not there for my customer service, as my therapist tells me regularly. So I know I hear a lot about prison, and I'm very fortunate that I didn't have to go, that I was able to make this deal, but I also feel like there's that hard sentence that was given down. There's no way for me to like even though I'm doing all these things and I know I'm working hard and I'm again very grateful for where I'm at, I just don't feel like there's a way out until, 11 more years from now. And I know I'm worth a chance to get out and not have to worry about that as much.
I hate to go back to what everyone's been talking about, but we as a society do not emphasize what we should, which is making programs and things available. So I'm talking about your individual probation officer. I don't know who that person is, but
I'll say he's a very good person. He treated me fairly and responds to me as much more time. He's the third one I've had in 4 years, and he responds to me. So at least there's that.
But the state just got funding for probation, so probation officers are going to have even more cases, so we'll do less. So we as a society have not invested in mental health care as we should. So we just give that to the criminal justice system where you warehouse these people who have mental health problems. We don't have enough resources for people who want to address their drug addiction issues. They don't have enough probation officers to help individual people who want to do better.
My first probation officer, she moved out of the caseload where I'm at, but she shared with me eventually that she had about 100 people to keep track of.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, no wonder I'm here for you sometime for months.
Yeah, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry.
But I also look at that as like the earned time credit. That's a tool they could be using to help with that law, that caseload, and where it's appropriate to use. Thank you for letting me share.
Yeah, I know that was probably the last question, but my question to you guys all of his, which is really for Brad and Megan, and Megan's my boss, I'm a little nervous.
Oh my goodness.
But how do we open up the lines of communication with probation, knowing that their funding just got cut? I wish there was someone from probation here. I don't know.
Right.
I want to understand the difficulties in policy and decision making from probation that they're experiencing, because I need to start having these really hard conversations with my clients who maybe want probation but aren't ready for it, or are facing their 14th or 15th felony conviction and are ready for it, and they've only ever been incarcerated. But I just had this happen last week. 14th and 15th felony conviction, personal possession, nearing his 60s, finally ready. I set up a plan in place trying to make it easier for probation, for him to just be transported straight into rehab. I'm kind of doing the legwork, making the case, and then he gets a good sentence, which is a year in DOC mitigated to run concurrent on all of his cases, and he gets time credit. And so he'll be out 6 months and he'll have no one to report to, and that's perfectly good and fine. But this was someone who's begging me to put him on 3 years of probation so he could just go to rehab. And I don't want a probation officer to have to hang on to him for 3 years. I think honestly, maybe a year of supervision with some solid plan in place could have just been enough, but he was in this position. So anyway, I'm just blabbering on, but I really appreciate the question about probation, because I think we have a mass incarceration and a mass supervision problem in this country.
So I do want to give some props to probation, because I will say that Chief Sanders and David Kwan, who's here, I feel lucky to be a public defender in Pima County, because we have stakeholders here who really do believe in keeping people out of prison. Unfortunately, the state is making funding decisions that I don't entirely understand. It's more expensive to incarcerate people than it is to give them a shot on probation. One of the things that my office is doing is working to hire social workers, which Antaya knows, and a big piece of that, I think, is trying to change the way the system looks at public defenders, because we aren't just there to get people off on technicalities, we're there to try to help people change their lives and really be a partner in figuring out release plans for people. Sarah Kostick, who's my chief assistant, is here, and she, along with Jennifer Salem Russo, who is my social work supervisor, have been meeting regularly with probation to start building that partnership. But it's a really new system for Arizona. This has been going on in New York City for decades, but it hasn't happened here. And I was fortunate to work under Joel Feynman, who went to the Bronx Defender and learned about their holistic defense model and bring it back here, and have been fortunate to continue to build on that. And I think that's something that we're really working on here in Pima County, is figuring out how do we divide these tasks and build that trust so that we can, create plans for people. I'm not gonna put Brad on the spot because he doesn't know the specific case, but I also think it's a matter of really reevaluating what are the plea policies, because I can tell you, as well as this, I've had clients where even as a defense attorney, I thought, okay, I'm gonna fight for IPS for you, intensive probation for you, but what are the chances you're gonna make it? And then I've been the person that's been there getting their conviction set aside because that was the time where they finally did it. And I've been in staffings with judges where they said, what's the point? We all know they're gonna fail on probation. Well, who am I to know when someone's gonna fail on probation? And so I think it's reevaluating, is this really a public safety issue, or is this just us substituting our judgment for whether someone is capable of doing something? And that's just a narrative we have to keep fighting to change. So thank you for being a public defender and helping us fight to change it.
All right, well, we have only a couple minutes left, so I'm gonna give you each an opportunity in 1 minute or less to either sum up or tell us if you had a magic wand and you were to change something about the criminal justice system, what would it be and why?
I'm gonna go back to reallocating resources to mental health issues, to drug addiction issues, and as opposed to warehousing. And I don't think you even need to spend more if you spend it differently, and I think you get better outcomes.
That's great.
I don't know how we should change the system, but we say a couple things. First of all, my students will say to me, how do I make a difference in this world? Well, there's only a few people probably in the history of the world that have made a difference in the world. Make a difference in your corner of the world. So all of you who are employed, go back tomorrow and see what is the policy with where you work. Do they hire people with criminal convictions? If not, if you feel comfortable, you might want to talk to them and say, why don't we? Why don't we think about that?
So I think we've talked a lot about resources, and I agree with all of those things in shrinking the criminal justice system. I would say for those of us that are parents, it is about having conversations about the humanity of people. My first experience with deciding to become a public defender was doing pro bono legal work with my dad at a homeless shelter, and him afterwards saying, not a single person we talked to has a legal remedy, but they had someone shake their hand and treat them like a human being. And most of us, I'm a public defender, I spent hours upon hours at the Pima County Jail getting to know people in the system. And I would say that nothing probably changes in the way we want it to change unless we stop trying to put people away so we don't have to look at them, and we take the time to listen to their stories and shake their hand and realize that they're a human being.
I think that's perfect. Recovery and healing lies in community, and it's changing people's mindsets about anyone's potential. And just, I would encourage everyone that when you have the opportunity to meet someone new, or you see someone that maybe you wouldn't necessarily hang out with, try to reserve your judgment, because they're somebody's daughter or son. They're somebody, and somebody's crying for them, and somebody's praying for them. And when you have the chance, just create a safe space for someone to just, share their story. And I think we said it a bunch of times up here, we have to stop throwing people away because we can't presume to know when someone's gonna get it right. Like I had tried, I think, I don't know how many times to get my life on track. And nobody knew that this was gonna be the time I did it. Nobody knew, but everybody believed.
Yeah, I can't top that. I think it's like we need to focus on not stigmatizing people and recognizing humanity and a real focus on healing. So healing for the people that are going through the system, healing for the people who work in the system who are going through a lot of stress. We really have to, focus on that and make this, kind of a kind of gentler system. That's going to take a lot of movement, but that's what we need. I really appreciate all the questions here. It was great.
Yeah, very engaged crowd. Let's give our panelists one more hand. And thanks all of you for coming. Feel free to come up and chat with the panelists. For those of you who would like to see how our software works and how it helps people kind of determine what is on the record and what their legal options are, all do a demo. But if you need to go or you'd like to talk to one of the panelists, feel free to do that as it goes along. Thank you.